couple of years before she took my course, a student of mine, whom I'll call Stella, received a promotion from her company in Westchester. "We think you're excellent," they said. "The new position will give you higher status and recognition. There'll be some travel involved. Since we're in the middle of a recession, we won't be able to give you much money, but we think we can find $5,000 for you. Will you take the position?" Stella thought about it for a day or two and said yes. 4 months later, Stella found that she was a road warrior. Her health and social life were suffering, and she was nearly exhausted. One day, back at the office, several of her peers were chatting with her, and they said, "We were surprised when you accepted the offer." "Really? Why?" asked Stella. "Well," they said, "everyone knows that you're much better than the guy you replaced, and we're not sure you realize this, but both he and we are making $60,000 more than you are." Stella's story bugs me. It's unjust for a firm to take such advantage of one of its employees, and I don't want anyone I care about to be so badly mistreated. And that means we need to think about the task of claiming value in a negotiation. That is, dividing the pie, or as we call it, distributive bargaining. Now, you may love distributive bargaining. You may feel that this part of the course is the one you've been waiting for, and I hope you get a great deal out of this session. But I have a confession to make. Distributive bargaining is very much an acquired skill for me. Frankly, like many people, I often wonder, can't you live without distributive negotiation? Understandably, we often feel anxious about it. But Stella's story illustrates that we often need to know how to handle it better. And I've learned that I and anyone can learn to do it well without needless anxiety and without creating ill will. That said, we'll see that there are times when it's best not to do it at all. To do distributive bargaining better, we need to answer 4 questions. First, what should you strive for? Second, what should your first offer be? Third, should you make the first offer? And 4, when do you walk away? In this session, we'll answer the first 2 questions. We'll answer the last 2 questions in the next session. So, what should you strive for? The answer depends in part on whether it's an arm's length transaction, a one-time transaction that's arm's length, an ongoing relationship, or a close relationship. Let's start by looking at arm's length transactions. Several years ago, Inc. magazine published an interview with sports agent Bob Wolf, whom I mentioned in Lecture 4. Wolf was one of the founders of Modern Sports Agency, a seasoned lawyer and a highly successful representative of top figures like Boston Celtics basketball great Larry Bird, the Boston Red Sox Hall of Famer Carl Yastrzemski, and many famous singers and actors. Wolf shocked his interviewer by saying this, "I've never done a deal that I couldn't have gotten more money on. I always leave money on the table." "Why?" asked the interviewer. "Because it's possible to push the price so hard, create such antagonism, that the last 10% really isn't worth it. If someone feels you held them up, he's going to take it out on you or someone you know. Your good reputation is incredibly important. You've got to let the other guy have a profit margin and let him live. You're going to be going back to him again or someone he deals with. You can't play tricks." The interviewer persisted and said, "But isn't getting everything the very definition of success?" But Wolf was firm. "Look," he said, "if it really was a one-time transaction, I might press for more, but I still wouldn't hold out for the last dollar." Now, this is one of the best sports agents of his day, and you know the reputation of sports agents. So what is Bob Wolf talking about? Is it just a private preference, a false claim, an eccentricity? No, it's wisdom. What Wolf is talking about is the idea that a skilled negotiator often intentionally moderates ambition slightly. Each of those words is important. Intentionally moderates ambition slightly. Let's look at that first word first, intentionally. At least 22 studies have found that it's effective to intentionally, explicitly set your goal before you negotiate. Picture 2 negotiators, 2 different ones, each getting ready for a negotiation. One says to himself, "I'm going to try to do as well as I can." The other negotiator says to herself, Based on my research, I'm setting an ambitious but realistic goal for myself, and I'm going to write it down and tell it to someone I'm accountable to. Guess which one does better? Overwhelmingly, the research demonstrates that the second negotiator, the one who identified a specific goal, does markedly better than the negotiator who just hopes to do well. There's something about writing down a goal number and even being accountable to another person that tends to improve your performance in the negotiating room. So there's the first lesson. To do better in distributive bargaining, write down your goal and tell someone about it beforehand. But why moderate ambition? Because studies find a reputation for greediness tends to backfire. In one study, some negotiators were assigned extremely greedy goals. Others were assigned more moderate goals. In some cases, the greedy negotiators got more, but in almost every case, they faced serious blowback afterwards. In follow-up interviews, the greedy negotiators' counterparts said they didn't like the greedy negotiators, didn't trust him, wouldn't share a gift with them if they had the chance. When counterparts had the chance to negotiate again with their greedy former counterparts, they exacted revenge, driving hard bargains, being much more defensive, and sometimes reaching no deal at all. But it gets worse. As one study found, if you get a reputation for being greedy, it can negate your effectiveness altogether, even if you're an expert negotiator. In one study, over 200 negotiators were brought together for simulated talks. Half were novices, half were expert negotiators. Researchers told some of the novices that their expert counterparts were greedy sharks. It wasn't true. Most of the expert negotiators, like Bob Wolf, know it's unwise to act like that. But it didn't matter. In the talks, expert negotiators who were falsely tarred with this bad reputation did poorly. Their talks with novice counterparts frequently broke down. The deals they did agree to frequently were very uncreative, and at best, only somewhat satisfying. That should scare us. It means you could faithfully study this entire course, practice regularly, read the accompanying book, and several others until you become an expert negotiator. But if you acquire a reputation for greediness along the way, you'll have completely wasted your time. You'll be no more effective than the novice. No wonder Bob Wolf warned his interviewer about the danger of being greedy. Now, so far, I haven't helped you very much, because we still have a huge question. How much, then, should you strive for specifically? How do you draw the line? How much is greedy? As we'll see, setting an ambitious goal is not the only way. There are other goals we can seek instead. But for now, let's consider this. In arm's-length transactions, Bob Wolf and other skilled negotiators recommend slight moderation. That is, ambition, not greediness. Let's see how to make that advice operational. We want to begin by setting a best target. A best target is the number you actually hope to get. It's the outcome you're hoping for when the talks are over. When you're striving for an ambitious result, your best target is a specific, realistic, but ambitious outcome. This is a confidential number. We're not talking now about your first offer. For reasons we'll see in a moment, in most negotiations, we usually need to add a cushion to your best target in order to set a first offer. If the other negotiator's demand is way to the right, your best target is pretty far to the left, and your first offer will be even further away from the other negotiator, way out to the left, beyond your best target. We'll very definitely figure out ways to determine the first offer, but that depends largely on what your best target is, and I want to make it easy for you to get the idea that when we're talking about a best target, we're talking about something else, your heart-of-hearts secret aspiration. Let's imagine that you're selling a boat and that you need to negotiate a price. You do some research and you learn that the most that anyone in a similar situation is getting for such a boat is $100,000. What should your best target be? Now, you might think it's obvious, $100,000. But remember Bob Wolf's advice about not holding out for the last dollar? Remember the research that recommends against being greedy? $100,000 is too much. Well, what we need is a way to intentionally, operationally moderate ambition slightly. To do that, let's use the 5% rule of thumb. Find out what's the best you can do, and then, as the best target, set a number that's 5% worse. That's right. A negotiation professor who teaches in business school in New York City is advising you to seek worse. How much worse? 5% worse than the best you can do. So let's see what that looks like. We've said that you imagine that your best price that you can hope for based on research is $100,000. 5% of that is $5,000. So $100,000 minus $5,000 would give us a best target of $95,000. Now, later, we'll figure out what cushion we'll need in order to determine our first offer. But that's for later. Now, you might hear this discussion about the 5% rule of thumb and say, wait a minute, Professor Freeman, I have some objections here. And you're probably right. The 5% rule is just a rule of thumb. It doesn't always work. So when it doesn't, lose the rule, but keep the principle. And the principle is simple. Moderate ambitions slightly. So let's try a quick check to make sure I'm being clear. Imagine you want to buy a used motorcycle, and the Blue Book Guide reports that the bike you want with the same make, model, mileage, and condition sells for between $20,000 and $25,000. What should your best target be if you want to be ambitious, according to what we've said so far? Our answer would be $21,000. Why? Because the best you can do, according to our research, is $20,000, and 5% worse than that number, for you, the buyer, is $1,000 more, or $21,000. Now, there's no law that says you have to follow the 5% rule, and I don't expect you to fully accept it at this point. Here, then, is my suggestion. Make sure you have the idea down, and then try a few distributive negotiations as practice. For some of them, intentionally apply the 5% rule of thumb and, more generally, the idea of moderating ambition slightly. See which approach works best for you. But now, let me see if I can rock your world by proposing a radically different goal altogether, besides an ambitious outcome. It's an idea called satisficing. Satisficing is a word coined by Nobel Prize-winning economist Herb Simon that means basically a basically acceptable outcome. That is, settling for a good enough result. While there's room to debate what exactly that means in a negotiation, one way to understand it is this: something a bit better than your best alternative. In his book, The Paradox of Choice, Barry Schwartz makes the case that one of our biggest problems is affluenza, the overwhelming and often paralyzing array of choices we face in consumer society. Walk into a pharmacy or a supermarket, and you'll be presented with dozens of different choices of toothpaste, hair coloring, soda, stockings, and so on. Studies find that the more choices we have, the less satisfied we become. Offer a few investment choices to employees, and many will enroll in the pension plan. But as you add more choices, employee participation tends to fall. If you have 6 ice cream flavors to choose from, you tend to buy more often than if you have 60. That's the paradox of choice. Schwartz is alluding to a philosophical dilemma we face especially in the West, the problem of the hedonic treadmill. The more we strive for perfect happiness, the more exhausted, dissipated, and unhappy we become. Many religions teach the idea that it's best not to strive for so much. It's also the concluding idea in F. Scott Fitzgerald's great novel, The Great Gatsby. Gatsby believed in the green light, in the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. Tomorrow we will run faster, stretch our arms farther, and one fine morning, and so we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. Gatsby is a tragic figure. a man who lived a fraudulent and superficial life of endless aspiration and who died in its pursuit. Schwartz, echoing ancient and modern wisdom, advises that we get off the hedonic treadmill by satisficing, by accepting good enough, by not trying to get the absolute best video tonight or endlessly striving for the best possible salary, but by being content with what is sufficient. You will not hear me criticize or negate that wisdom. I think many times he is quite right. Let's add this to it, though. As we saw in an earlier session, in 1957, after almost a century of inaction on civil rights, the U.S. Congress finally passed an almost trivial Civil Rights Act that barely did anything to better the lives of African Americans who had long suffered widespread discrimination. Martin Luther King had been a civil rights leader for about 2 years and now came under great pressure. Why keep fighting? Here was almost unprecedented federal legislation. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but wasn't it enough to end all this confrontation and demonstration in the streets? King would have none of it. As he later put it, quoting from the Bible, "We shall not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." And after several more years of nonviolent protest, King helped win passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, two landmark acts that revolutionized the legal status of African Americans. As an advocate for millions of oppressed minority members, King could not, in good conscience, satisfice. And in my student Stella case, if Stella had rationalized her tiny raise by saying that she had chosen the wiser path of satisficing, chances are she would have been kidding herself and accepting an unjust, below-market outcome that treated her with disrespect. If she had special needs for tuition or for health care or for support of a loved one, satisficing would have been that much harder to justify. There's another distributive choice besides greediness, ambition, and satisficing, and that is compromise. In many situations, such as partnerships, joint ventures, and other ongoing arm's-length arrangements, an equitable or equal split may make sense. We saw the power of our need for fairness in an earlier session when we looked at the ultimatum game. There, we saw that people will often turn down huge sums of money if they feel they're getting a very unfair deal. So we may want to take this choice seriously. A roughly even split often communicates the desire to be fair. It also builds trust and simplifies matters. Studies often find that a settlement in the middle of the bargaining range creates goodwill and trust. Here too, though, there can be traps and dangers. In compensation talks, for example, if one employee compromises and the other achieves an ambitious result, they may find over time that the ambitious negotiator's gains accumulate, especially if each gets a percentage raise. Also, founders of joint ventures sometimes agree too hastily to split profits evenly and live to regret it. That's especially true when they later discover that one founder is putting far more energy and time into the business than the other negotiator is. Still, fair division can be a wise choice in many cases. Now let me rock your world even more and suggest that there are some situations, perhaps many, where the wise course is not to be ambitious, not to compromise, and not even to satisfice, but to be generous. In his book, Give and Take, Wharton professor Adam Grant asks whether nice guys finish last. He looks at social science research that compares three kinds of people in business life. Nice guys, or givers, who tend to be generous in their dealings with others, reciprocators, or matchers, who work on the premise, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and aggressive people, or takers, who strive to get as much as they can. Who succeeds by various measures? Not surprisingly, research shows that nice guys do finish last. Givers tend to be promoted less, prosper less, and build weaker businesses. Matchers and takers tend to do better. But there is one group that tends to do significantly better than any of them. Givers. Wait, what? I thought givers did worst. As Grant shows, the research is clear that while some givers do worse than others in business life, many givers do best of all. Naive, gullible givers can get burned. These are folks who never consider the possibility that they're being taken advantage of and who never set wise boundaries. But other givers tend to flourish. These are folks who build a reputation for being generous and who know how to watch for bad behavior and how to set good boundaries. They do what Bob Wolf advises. You've got to develop the reputation for being smart and honest. To put it another way, the research suggests that the generous do best when they have the ability to be savvy as a serpent, harmless as a dove. And if you think about it, skills and principles we've explored already, such as interest-based bargaining and being hard on the problem, soft on the person, can help you combine those powerful qualities. You don't have to use them sacrificially. If you want, they can enable you to be generous and successful. But now, let's turn back to where we started and consider again an ambitious approach. In practice, I find that many negotiators say they want to be ambitious, they want to do very well for themselves, but they often do rationalize lesser results. I do not believe that any one choice, generosity, satisficing, compromise, or ambition, is always right. But I do want you to know how to be ambitious so that you can choose to do it intentionally whenever justice or service or legitimate need require it. We've already learned how to set an ambitious best target. So let's ask the second question. What should your first offer be? This brings us to the idea of the dance of concessions. Picture a typical negotiation that goes like this. One side says, "We'll give you $70,000. The other replies, "I was thinking more like 100,000. The first replies, "No, that's impossible, but we might consider 76. And the second says, "Well, we're still far apart, but I might be able to accept 95. And back and forth they go, 83, 90, and so on, until they finally agree to $85,000. Look familiar? It's almost as if the two negotiators are in a cha-cha, dancing toward each other. So choreographed is the exchange of offers. We call this the dance of concessions. Not every negotiation has it. When I go to the supermarket and they tell me a head of lettuce sells for, say, 50 cents, I don't reply, "I'll give you 25. At Tiffany's, this dance is frowned on, typically. In some cultures, it's considered bad form. But in many negotiations, perhaps even most, it's expected and indeed almost required. United States labor law now says that the refusal to engage in the dance of concessions in collective bargaining is bad faith and illegal in most cases. Similarly, U.S. car dealers found in the 1990s when they stopped haggling with customers and went to one price, no negotiation approach, that so many car buyers resented it and walked away that they had to return to the old-fashioned methods. Why? Because in most negotiations, negotiators feel that a concession gives them a psychological sense of satisfaction, respect, and fairness, and helps them feel that the other negotiator is more trustworthy. That's in part because winning a concession creates a feeling of control and autonomy. Deny another negotiator a concession, and he may well feel that you're unfairly dictating terms. Now, as we've begun to see, a concession is not the same thing as a bargain. At the Great Wall of China, I thought I got a great deal when I got a seller to cut her price from $30 to $12, only to discover later that I could have bought the same camera elsewhere for $5. Not a good deal. Still, refusing to make concessions can quickly alienate your counterparty. That has implications. If you go into a negotiation and simply state your best target, the other negotiator will often treat it as a first offer and then will counteroffer. If you refuse to dance and insist on getting your best target, the other negotiator will probably resent it and refuse. In other words, if you open with your best target, you almost certainly are not going to get it. Now, I want you to get your best target as long as it's well researched and well thought out. So we need to know how to wisely build a cushion into your first offer so you can make concessions and still get your best target. I'm going to give you 3 different strategies. The first is called the midpoint strategy. It's based on this observation. The point midway between two opening offers is not a bad predictor of where the final negotiating settlement will fall. That's what we saw in our example a moment ago. Often, I find students wind up about 5% away from the average of their first offers. We can harness the midpoint phenomenon as a strategy where you simply set a first offer that lets you dance toward a midpoint that you really want. So, going back to our boat example, if the best price you can hope for based on research is $100,000, and again, we take 5%, that's $5,000, and deduct it to derive our best target of $95,000, and we assume the buyer is going to offer $70,000, well, what should our first offer be using this midpoint strategy? Well, we're looking for a number which, together with $70,000 and divided by 2, will get us to $95,000. Well, that number would be $120,000. So our best target is $95,000. You'll add a $25,000 cushion, and a first offer will be $120,000. And you hear this, and you may well want to say, wait a minute. You're saying that I should ask for $40,000 more than the $70,000 that they open with? That's going to sound greedy. They'll throw me out. I know. Midpoint strategy can sometimes suggest a scary-sounding first offer. And yes, there are some situations, like most salary negotiations, where it's usually not a good idea. But here's the thing. In a number of situations, it can work. Let's not cherish it. We have other choices, but let's not reject it altogether either. There may be ways for us to get more comfortable with it. Before we leave midpoint strategy, let's see why there might be method to the seeming madness of it. Studies have found that when negotiators start out very high and quickly make big concessions, their counterparts tend to be more satisfied with the final agreement than when negotiators start more conservatively and make grudging concessions. I've had this experience. When I went shopping to buy an apartment last year with my wife, I would get very excited when I saw a listing marked down $75,000, even though I know that the seller probably was starting with a very high cushion first offer. The concession attracted my excitement. I teach this stuff and I still felt that way. But again, we don't have to use midpoint strategy, and there are times when it is inappropriate. That includes when you're negotiating for a new job, especially an entry-level job. In other settings, where the norm would prompt the other negotiator to strongly object, we also might want to avoid it. Your research will help you discover these situations. One other thing. What if you can't really guess what the other's first offer will likely be? A variation that partly addresses that problem is to take your best target and add the biggest cushion you feel you can give some plausible reason for. For example, the price is $115,000 because we bought the boat for a similar amount and maintained it very well. In fact, it may be a good idea to offer a plausible reason generally. A second strategy for setting a first offer is the independent criteria strategy. As you may recall, an independent criterion is a benchmark or standard that both sides trust as fair. We can use an independent criterion as the basis for setting our first offer. Once again, let's consider our boat negotiation. The best price you can hope for based on research is $100,000. Again, we'll take 5% off or $5,000 for a best target of $95,000. Now our cushion now will be much smaller because we're going to determine that the Blue Book Boat Owner's Monthly Guide tells us that $100,000 is fair. So we're going to set that number as $100,000 as our opening offer and just use $5,000 as a cushion. Now, imagine that the other side offers $70,000. We respond by asking for $100,000. We'll offer that independent criterion, say the Blue Book Owner's Guide to boat prices. Imagine they counter with $76,000. They may expect us to match them dollar for dollar. I come up $1, you come down $1. But we don't need to do that. Instead, we can say, well, I want to be fair, and I know you do too. To show good faith, I'm willing to make a concession. But since my first offer is based on a respected independent source, I can't match it dollar for dollar since I'm demonstrating fairness another way. So now you can propose, say, $97,000 and still have a reasonable chance to reach your best target of $95,000. There's a third strategy which you can use with the other two, a soft offer strategy. Ever seen offers like this? Asking $110, $120 or best offer, $120 negotiable, price $100 to $120. What's going on here? My favorite is that last one. Who in his right mind would read an ad like that and say, I think I'll pay $120? Here's the method to that madness. Each of these is a soft offer, a first offer that signals a strong willingness to negotiate and concede. In each case, the seller is saying, I'm going to make the first offer, but I'm afraid if I do, I may ask for too little. So I'm going to ask for a lot, but I don't want to signal that I'm trying to be greedy, because I'm really not. So I'm going to invite buyers to dance. And the way I'll do it is by using one of these soft offers. I'm not demanding $110, I'm just asking. $120 is just one offer, tell me yours. I'm negotiable, look. I'll even make the first concession in advance from $120 to $100. So if you're not comfortable with a pure form of the midpoint strategy, you don't have to use it. In the boat negotiation, for example, you can soften it by saying something like this. The price I have in mind is something in the area of $100,000 to $120, but I'm negotiable. You can use a similar process with the independent criteria strategy. So now you have several ways to craft a workable first offer. Let's acknowledge that, as Harvard negotiation professor Howard Rafa put it, negotiation is an art as much as a science. You may not get your best target, but as we've seen, an intentional approach very much improves your chances. So let me here give you the best targets and first offer challenge. The next time you want to ambitiously negotiate a single issue like price, do some research, use the 5% rule of thumb to set a best target, write it down, and then strategically cushion using midpoint or independent criteria strategy, perhaps with a soft offer. Then negotiate. Distributive negotiation is rich and nuanced enough that we have more to consider about it. What if you can't tell what your best target is? Regardless, should you make the first offer? What should you do in special distributive cases like litigation settlements, auctions, and price talks involving agents? What are some of the common traps and challenges we face dividing the pie, and what non-obvious solutions can help us? We'll explore specific answers to these questions in our next session.